Welcome to the Connecting to Reimagine webinar. Today, I'm very happy to moderate a session on a very important topic, rethinking the role of investor protection and education. And we have a very impressive group of speakers from around the world. We face a global crisis and we want to hear about problems and solutions around the world. The webinar will last an hour today, and I will ask several questions to many of our speakers. And I'd like to start actually with a question which is the same for all of you. What challenges are the financial market regulators facing amid this COVID-19 pandemic? And mention also how your organizations have addressed some of those challenges. I actually would like to start with you, Lindwil, and just to be in a sense comprehensive, but at the same time not too long, I really would like to ask you if you can mention potentially, either the top 3 or the 3 challenges that financial market regulators are facing in South Africa.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon in South Africa, but good morning and good evening to wherever you are. So I'll mention 2, and I think the first one probably affects all of us. It's the volatility of the markets that we experienced at the start of the pandemic. But unlike some of the foreign markets, what we did in South Africa, we didn't stop trading on those counters that was very volatile. We rather let it run. And in hindsight, it was probably a good decision as we saw those counters stabilizing, and we're still monitoring and trying to be very optimistic in growth and stability in the markets going forward. But I think the main challenge from our side is the emergence of scams and frauds on the digital platforms, and especially for either existing and new investors that wanted to actually engage in the market to recoup some of the losses. Some of people have lost their jobs during the lockdown periods. And I think from our side, we're currently investing around about 170 cases just to find out whether these are legal platforms or whether they are trying to scam consumers. And obviously from a consumer point of view, we're trying to encourage and to promote more online messaging to our consumers. And the basic message is only deal with authorized financial services providers that are licensed by the FSCA to sell you a specific product.
Let's move to Brazil now. So Vasco, what are the challenges facing financial market regulator there, and what are some of the things you have done, CVM has done?
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this prestigious event. I'm happy to see you all through Zoom. But anyway, it's good to see that you are all safe and well. Brazil is facing a lot of challenges, no doubt about that, but I'm going to focus on capital markets issues. And it's interesting that usually one of the mandates of a regulator in emerging markets is to promote market development. So interestingly, that happened during COVID. During the worst days of the crisis in March, there was a flood of first-time investors to the stock exchange in Brazil, not only to buy stocks, but also derivatives, mutual funds. And so between 2019 and 2020, and it grew exponentially last year, we had more than 2 billion new investors in our stock exchange, also the number of investors in mutual funds. So it was actually I was a little bit surprised about that because of all the volatility that was involved. Foreign investors were selling Brazil, were leaving the stock exchange, but around 25,000 foreign investors and almost 220,000 investors in 15 days decided to invest in shares. So it was a new normal for us. It's good news, but also it put us a lot of challenges. And we try to deal with that first with research in partnership with the stock exchange and also with the the Brazilian FINRA, the ANBIMA, we had we carried out some surveys, try to understand why, why this is happening. What are the needs of these new investors? We think that, oh, they need this and that, but it's important to give a voice to investors, especially in such a different scenario. It's interesting that because it's on average, the first-time investors are investing like $100. Actually, some people invest $40, and they do not only buy one stock. Actually, they are trying to build a portfolio. And the research has shown that there is a growing interest in investing in Brazil, and not only because of the interest rates, but people also are thinking about their future. And we cannot say for sure, but it seems that financial education, the campaigns that Brazil has promoted over the last 10 years to change the culture of Brazilians and promote financial education with big campaigns on how to save, how to invest, may have played a role to help people to think that in the long term. So they are not afraid of volatility, but of course we are very concerned about the protection of these new investors. So they are also exposed to fraud, to scams, and also to a lot of social media influencers that are sometimes advising people on how to make decisions. So we have a lot of initiatives. We launched a Ponzi scheme, a CVM Ponzi scheme website, so people can try to invest in our enterprise, and they get an alert. So other jurisdictions did the same, and we also try to reach out these new investors where they are. So we launched the Instagram, new profile, podcasts, and a lot of new resources for these first-time investors, which is good news, but also it's a big responsibility for us as regulators to make sure they will be informed and can make their decisions with great care.
So from Brazil now we come to Italy, and with Nadia Linciano. Nadia, what's happening there, and what are the challenges that financial market regulators are facing?
Hi, everyone. First of all, Anna, let me thank you for inviting me. And let me say that I'm very happy to see and meet also the other speakers, although virtually. The challenges raised by the pandemic are many and long-term in nature in Italy. First of all, vulnerability. In the first semester 2020 over the first semester 2029, both household income and consumption fell by 9 percentage points, approximately, a figure which is much higher than that recorded during the big financial crisis. Financial vulnerability is expected to rise if public support does not timely address it. According to some estimates, the proportion of households who are expected to experience a loss in income and an increase in indebtedness could hit the levels recorded during the sovereign debt crisis in 2011. At the same time, we have a long-term challenge related to household participation in financial markets. Due to pandemic, the saving rate upsurged from 10% at the end of 2019 to slightly more than 15% at the end of 2020. Also, the preference for liquidity rose. Over the first 9 months of last year, household assets held in cash and deposits increased by about 60 billion euros. So overall, now the stock of liquidity held by households is more than double of the capitalization of the Italian stock markets. So we can easily understand that these developments exacerbated the problem, the issue that is typical of the Italian framework, that is the low household participation in financial markets, which in turn is inefficient both at an individual level and on a collective grounds. And that in Italy, as shown also by survey data, is due to low savings, lack of trust in financial intermediaries, high risk aversion, and limited financial literacy. And the third challenge I want to mention has to do with the frauds and scams, as also the speakers before pointed out. During the lockdown weeks in particular, scammers exploited the pandemic to spread fake news, mainly via the internet, leveraging on the fear of COVID-19 contagion. So victims were typically offered non-existent stocks or bonds issued by fake companies allegedly active in the containment of the disease or trading virtual currencies linked to the lethality of the virus, the so-called corona coin. Consob reacted, first of all, by activating the new powers. So we were able to timely black out abusive websites. And actually, currently we are now trying to study new measures in order to shield investors from online advertising and fake news. Also, we published many warnings and we intensified our educational events based also on the edutainment. Thanks to virtual meetings, we were able to outreach a wider audience, including students and adults. And we also benefited from cooperation within the Committee for Financial Education, as well as partnership with the universities and market participants. And I think that we will leverage on these further in the future.
Thank you very much, Nadia. We can see, first of all, how similar are some of these problems, and good to hear some of the solutions as well. We are going to stay in Europe now, but look at Europe in all the set of countries, and I'm just so happy to have Marcel Haag from the European Commission. So what can you tell us when we look at the European countries? What are some of the challenges that the financial regulator and the European Commission has been facing in the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, thank you, Anna Maria, and I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I must say the situation across Europe is not so very different from the situation in Italy, or for that purpose in South Africa or Brazil. So I think I can limit myself to complementing to what has already been said. If you want to describe the challenges at a very high level, I would say increased volatility and increased risks are the challenges that we've been facing. Many households have seen a reduction in their income. That means there is a risk of a rise of non-performing loans across Europe, and the European Central Bank has pointed this out only last week, and that is in spite of the fact that many European countries have introduced moratoria on debt payments, either on a legislative basis or voluntarily negotiated with the banks. We have also seen that a number of households that could afford it have saved more. And we have also seen in several markets an increase in retail investments in equity. That has been quite a pronounced phenomenon. We've seen a very strongly increased volatility of asset prices in a number of sectors. Asset prices have been volatile overall, but then also followed their underlying value. So we've seen tourism related asset values going down. At the same time, logistics and home entertainment related assets going up. the increased digitalization triggered by the pandemic across the board has, of course, also been very tangible and visible in the financial sector, and that has put in question the traditional way that individuals are collecting information and take financial decisions. Digitalization has cut out the middleman, which can lead to also receiving less financial advice. And that makes, of course, then financial literacy particularly important. What have we done? In these times, policymakers have to make sure that we can decrease the volatility of prices, that we reduce speculation and prevent a worsening of the social situation. And in the financial sector, that means protecting the weakest market operators, which are the retail investors, and make them aware of the risks. As part of its mandate, the Commission has been monitoring the payments moratoria in the European countries, because that has a most direct implication for social policy. We have also made adjustments to the regulatory framework to address the pandemic and to take account of the specific requirements of a pandemic. And maybe I stop here.
Yeah, thank you so much. And let's turn to the US. And Jerry, tell us what has been happening in the US and what are some of the work that FINRA and FINRA Investor Education Foundation has done.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor. The U.S. situation in many ways echoes those of my colleagues who have gone before me. When the pandemic hit and brokers, as well as regulators and investors, were all remote working, FINRA took swift action to make sure that the markets were informed, that the intermediaries were informed about changes, offering some regulatory relief to brokers to help ease the situation, and also to monitor some of the scams that were directed not only at investors, but at the firms themselves. And so coordinating with state securities regulators and with the Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States, that really helped to consolidate efforts and focus on the kinds of frauds and scams that other countries similarly saw, the COVID-related scams. But a different dimension that we saw here in the United States that may have universal application is the social isolation that the pandemic brought to individuals. We know from research that the FINRA Foundation has engaged in with the Better Business Bureau and the Stanford Center on Longevity that social isolation is one of the factors that can make people susceptible to fraud, either isolation that you impose upon yourself, where you choose not to ask people for investment advice or for a reality check on a financial decision that you're about to make, but being separated from your networks, not having somebody that you can talk to, and coupled with job loss and economic pain that the pandemic brought, especially with shutdown of industries and services, and also the rise of social media platforms as avenues for investment advice and investment conversations by unregulated people, that kind of created a perfect storm for scam susceptibility. And we did see, as other countries saw, and the FINRA Foundation has done some research into new investors, the people who opened accounts during 2020, in part because of the volatility, wanting to take advantage of that, separately taking advantage of the rise of low and no cost, or commission, I should say, trading platforms. And those platforms aren't new, but they certainly rose in prominence and popularity, particularly among younger investors during 2020. And we saw that the people who opened their very first investment account in 2020 were more likely to be using mobile apps for investing. They were more likely to be young, to be diverse, to be low income, and their account balances were often as low as $500, which is similar to the situation in Brazil. The other end of the spectrum, though, with older Americans, one of the realities, and this isn't related directly to the pandemic, but it has implications for the pandemic, is that loneliness, social isolation, it's actually correlated with lower levels of financial and health decision making, especially among adults who have lower levels of cognition, those who are suffering mild cognitive impairment all the way to Alzheimer's. And so this is something that, in addition to all the regulatory steps that FINRA is taking, the FINRA Foundation is conducting research into the markers of scam susceptibility. We're also trying to better understand new investor behavior, and we're partnering with organizations all around the country, with our fellow regulators, as well as with nonprofits, in order to amplify messaging that can make a difference in people's lives, because the power of partnership is the force multiplier that we all need to avail of, because none of us can do it on our own, but working with others, we certainly can make a difference.
Thank you, Jerry, for this. And I'm going to turn now. We have heard about the many problems, and many of them are similar across countries. So let me turn now to the role of investor education, and how can we better empower people, given that these people are younger, they are newer, they face social isolations. There are like so many important issues. Lindwil, you have already mentioned a little bit investor education in your initial remarks, but let me turn to you and hear a little bit more about what's the role now of investor education, and how can we rethink the role of investor education?
Yeah, thank you, Anne-Marie. And I think a lot of the issues that has been raised is quite important. And we're trying a slightly different approach in South Africa, where we're trying to integrate consumer education with regulation, where you actually look at what is happening within divisions like enforcement, etc., and how do you actually then inform the public about what is happening? Because although you are a regulator, you also have to be seen to actually take people to book so that consumers can learn from these things. So we're taking a dual approach, where we're actually talking to the industry, because it seems that most of the fraudsters actually don't know what the law actually is. So they think they're operating legal entities when they're actually doing fraudulent activities. And that is why when we start investigating, we need to determine what is a scam and what is a legal entity. But I think we're also trying furthermore to actively encourage our industry to treat customers fairly. And we have the policy that is going, and we're trying to get our industry to actually promote a culture of treating their customers fairly, which means from a regulatory point of view, the integration part is where the consumer becomes the focal point, and not just your regulatory part. And in this way, we're trying to get the trust back that Nadia was talking about, and the confidence in the financial sector, so that people can come into the regulated market. But I think what is also important from an education point of view, the lockdown has shown us, like some of us had said, various new innovative ways of reaching consumers. And I think the recent Global Money Week has shown that innovative ideas around online education. In South Africa, we use community radio quite a bit. But I think we need to integrate our consumer education with other activities. And I'm looking at retirement programs. I'm looking at socio-economic programs for communities, because if we're going to make investor education as a standalone, it will not be realistic to the actual new investor. So we must make it part of their daily lives. Why do I invest? And at the end of the day, We'll have more people coming to the market. And obviously, sometimes we're talking to people that have money, but sometimes we talk about people that don't have money. And obviously, next and further on, we'll discuss how do we actually reach people that don't have money. But I think the first thing for us is to actually merge your consumer education with other activities so that it becomes a reality to a current and a prospective or potential investor.
And Nadia, how about you? You also had mentioned the important role of investor education, and how can we better empower people, in particularly, amid this COVID-19 pandemic, and given that, there is so much information coming from so many sources.
Yeah, I think that we really need to improve individuals' decision-making process, spanning from financial control to monitoring one's own choices. The pandemic highlighted that we need to make households resilient to financial shocks. So people need to learn how to make a financial plan, budgeting, saving, make better use of their money, for instance, by choosing suitable investment options and saving for retirement. Also, people need to be supported face to face with the emerging phenomena which were mentioned before: fintech, digitalization, sustainable investing. So financial education really may play a key role in enhancing people's knowledge of digitalized tools, digitalized financial services, and also in reorienting their preferences and time horizon towards the long term. Investor education may also enhance the effectiveness of other investor protection tools, and I really agree with what Lindwil has just said, that we need to see it, financial education as a tool complementing financial disclosure and rules of conduct, for instance. On the other side, in order to enhance the effectiveness of investor education, we really need to make financial disclosure simpler than it actually is, to make it salient, as people need to know which information they have to look for and why. We also need to engage intermediaries that can proactively apply rules of conduct, also in the perspective of playing themselves an educational role. As interacting with the savvier investors is beneficial to the intermediaries themselves in terms of long-term relationships and lower litigation costs. So all in all, in my opinion, a key lesson of the pandemic for all market participants is try to think long-term. Regulators can afford that. Financial education may play a key role in this respect, especially if we apply also and look at the OECD standards that are based on this long view since the beginning.
Thank you very much, Nadia. And I want to turn to the European Commission because it exactly needs a new capital market union action plan. There is this emphasis, first of all, how important a fully integrated single capital market is, in particular amid the COVID-19 recovery. And I'm reading here, one of the key objectives of the plan is to make the European Union an even safer place for individuals to save and invest long term. And one of the key actions is empowering citizens through financial literacy. So I'm turning now to Marcel Haag, and let's talk a little bit how can we empower citizens through financial literacy so they can better save and invest for the future and direct those additional savings through productive activities.
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, the focus on the individuals and the retail investor is one of the main strands and main objectives of our Capital Markets Union action plan. And here, improving financial literacy is one of the priorities. The others concern the increase of the quality of financial advice, and you can immediately see that is closely linked to the issue of financial literacy. And the third one is to improve pension adequacy in the member states, and again here providing for old age is also a question that is very closely linked to financial literacy. I mentioned earlier on that that we have seen not only a sudden drop in income in some households across Europe and an increase of savings in another group of households in Europe. And paradoxically, both developments call for paying more attention and giving more attention to financial literacy across the board. For us, financial literacy is part of a broader work strand that includes adequate retail investor and consumer protection. We would like to see financial literacy that enables retail investors to better understand both the protection that is afforded to them under legislation, but also their individual responsibilities, and make sure that the quality of the decisions that they take are improving. We do not see a tension between consumer protection and financial literacy and education. We think that financial literacy has to go hand in hand with adequate consumer protection measures and fair and adequate advice. So for us, financial literacy is part of an integrated retail strategy that aims at empowering consumers to participate in capital markets, allow them to take financial decisions that meet their needs and preferences, and ensure that consumers know their rights and are being treated fairly, and also importantly make sure that consumers are able to address their long-term financial needs via the investment decisions that they are taking. So maybe I leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you. This is very helpful and very important work. I've heard several speakers, in particular Nadia has mentioned sustainability, and I know that Brazil has done quite a bit of work when we think of investor education in also, educating about sustainability, something that so many countries are now talking about, and investors are also faced with, should they invest, should they consider ESG, securities, and so on. So I'm turning now to Vasco to talk a little bit more about sustainability and investor education.
Thank you for the question. I think this is a very important topic for us, and not only as an investor education topic, but also as part of a broader strategy. I think it's important to briefly touch upon on such a strategy. Sustainability is quite important for an emerging market. Sustainable development goals provide the opportunity to promote market development and support and finance the infrastructure that the countries need. In Brazil, millions of Brazilians do not have access to basic water, even treated water or basic water. And sanitation also is scarce in some areas. tens of millions of Brazilians do not have a proper access to sanitation. And that would require $1.3 trillion until 2030 if Brazil wants to fully comply with our commitments to the SDG agenda, the agenda of 2030. So it's resources that are not available for the government, and we need private investment. So, and that private investment will make a difference in the lives of millions of Brazilians by building the infrastructure that we must need. So in 2017, we launched the Financial Innovation Lab, in a public-private partnership with the market participants and regulators, just to think about innovative solutions to promote the finance of sustainable development goals in Brazil. Now we have around 200 organizations and more than 700 participants discussing green bonds, impact investment, innovation for promoting sustainable development. And we realized that investor education should be a key part of this broader strategy. And I think it's important to say that as the new generations of Brazilians also want to take into account social considerations in their investment decisions, it's important to protect them from fraud, from scams, and also from greenwashing. And I think it's also, especially in a market as still in development, as the Brazilian market, we need to build capacity so investors can understand the information that is being disclosed, because CVM is changing the regulation to make that disclosure of ESG factors more easy to compare, to analyze, to provide that information for investors that want to make their investment decisions based on that consideration. But they need, of course, some capacity to understand that information. And also, as part of a strategy, investor education can play a role on mainstreaming sustainable finance as more people get aware of these considerations, and then can fully plan their investments and implement their financial decisions. I want to say that as some market participants say here, it's make your investment matters. If you believe in climate change, if you believe that you need to focus on social impact investing, so you need the tools to do that. So we are promoting campaigns. The Global Money Week in 2019, we launched 8 webinars to, just to kick off the discussion with investors, institutional investors. Last year, we had a lot of events and online events to discuss sustainable finance, taxonomy, and we launched a new series of booklets. It's called CVM Sustentável, and it's also teaching investors on how to make their decisions. And we launched our first series of lives on Instagram to talk about those considerations to investors. We know that 90% of retail investors that invest in crowdfunding in Brazil, which is quite popular, they take into account, social considerations when they are making their investments. So we need to help them to make that investment matter.
Thank you so much. And I'm now starting already to take some questions. So I really welcome all the participants to send us some questions. And, I am a little bit elaborating the question here for in this respect. But in a sense, Jerry, can we do a little bit more prevention so that we avoid the problems, right, rather than having to clamp them down later on? So tell us a little bit more about that and what FINRA has done.
When you think about the tools that regulators have at their disposal for prevention, a rigorous regulatory regime will include, rules that are examined against so that there's constant monitoring of the markets and the market intermediaries for fraud, for scams, for inappropriate behavior, for market patterns that are problematic. And then enforcement when enforcement is warranted. But investor education, of course, is a key component of investor protection. And when you think about prevention, it can be very challenging for regulators, given that, their voice is but one in a sea of heavily financed advertising and consumer messaging that is out there. All the financial institutions are saying buy, 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 and influencers are saying buy, 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 or sell, sell, sell. And it can be very difficult for a regulator's voice to be heard. But at the FINRA Foundation, we recently released just a couple of weeks ago a new study that shows that even short video interventions or text interventions that teach people about the persuasion tactics that cons use, that also aggressive salespeople use, can help reduce loss of money to frauds and aggressive sales pitches without putting people in a position where they don't want to invest at all. You never want the investor education message to be so frightening or so complex that people just throw up their hands and don't want to invest. But on the other hand, we do know there is a path for regulators to get even short messages out that have staying power over time. So again, that power of partnership, working together, financial regulators teaming together with academics and nonprofits to get the word out, to build financial knowledge and specifically investment knowledge is so critical.
I have a quick question for you already, coming from the participant, Jerry now, which is how can also individual collaborate with the regulators or with the government? And we have the same problem, in other countries as well, and even at our financial education committee. It's hard to bring in individual. Do you have any suggestions on that?
For the individual, it can help to be aligned with an organization that has a charitable purpose. And so in the FINRA Foundation, for example, when we do grant making or look for project partners, we're typically looking for not-for-profit academic institutions and other nonprofit charities, non-government organizations. And so doing that volunteer work through those organizations is one way that individuals can be involved. With the FINRA Foundation, we don't give grants to individuals, but we do give them to nonprofit charities and to academic institutions. And so that's one way to get involved. In the United States, for example, there are a number of nonprofit organizations that are constantly seeking volunteers, from, Operation Hope and Junior Achievement, who are more focused on younger people, to AARP's Fraud Watch Network, the Better Business Bureau, the state cooperative extension agencies, which is part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They're in virtually every county of the United States, and many of them have financial outreach. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are multiple ways to get involved if you have the passion and that heart of a teacher to help build financial literacy.
Thank you. There are several questions. I'm going to bring them together, and I'm going to ask this to Lindwill, which is, how about the social impact of investing in financial markets? And in particular, let's think about the people, the little guy who doesn't have a lot of money. So, what can we also do for them?
I think as a financial activist or financial education activist and a regulator, you need to be realistic about the situation in your country. Vasco has mentioned many challenges that is in Brazil, that we share in South Africa. And we often refer to as a first, in South Africa, we have a first world economy and a third world economy. And although we have many investors on our exchanges, we also have a very, very high unemployment rate in South Africa, up to almost 30% that latest figures are showing. So in essence, I often get asked, why do you want to do financial education to people that don't earn a salary? But we also forget, and we mustn't forget, that each country has a very, very strong informal financial sector. And in South Africa, we have what we call informal savings clubs, where we estimate about members contribute about 50 billion rand to these savings clubs. The challenge for us as financial educators is, how do we educate these groups of people whose money is either sitting in a jar or under the mattress or just in one bank account somewhere? How do we then get out and do the education for them to invest that money to grow, not just on a personal level, but collectively? And I think it's important here that fintech actually can play, somebody spoke about fintech, can play a huge role in providing that education. But I think basically, I mean, to be brief, it needs to start with the savings culture. Before you can actually start investing, you need to start thinking about, we call it putting money away, not just saving, putting money away that you can do without. And once you've reached a point where you can do without that X amount of money, now you can say, I've done without that money for the past 6 months. Now let me see how further I can let that money grow. And I think that is a very, very good point to start, to create that savings culture. And that is where your financial education is vital, and the methods that you use to reach the consumers.
Thank you very much, Linwill. And I am turning now to Vasco, because there are so many questions for you about, for example, first of all, all of this social media that you have mentioned, and people are really worried that perhaps the social media influencers are actually giving the wrong message, and they are asking whether the regulator should clamp them down. We are also asking, how successful was the social impact investing Instagram Live? So there are, some very specific question for you, but also, and I'm bringing together other questions now. You have mentioned, and you have done a lot of research looking at all these different people. Can you talk us perhaps a little bit more about, who are the most vulnerable groups, and also about, which groups as well you have targeted in Brazil? And this is also for my own interest. I know that there are some projects that you have done which are, truly, truly exciting.
Thank you very much for the question. We have been trying to be inclusive in all we do. It's not possible to support all vulnerable groups, but we try hard to do our best in this sense. So we have offered opportunities in slum, of financial education opportunities in slums and in many places, public schools, even to association of women that were explored and economically and are in vulnerable conditions where so they are under protection, and we managed to do some work with them through an association, an NGO in Brazil. But I think our reality changed a little bit here. Last year, CVM adhered to Global Compact, so we are now have also to walk the talk. So we promote sustainability, but we also want to include it in different areas of our activities, and that includes, of course, education. But in 2019, I would just want to mention 2 projects. In 2019, the World Bank asked us to design a project to help to support school-to-work transition in Brazil. In slums in Rio de Janeiro, research showed that 55% of young people that join, a drug, a gang, if they have the opportunity of a job, they would leave the crime, so they would change their lives. So for many Brazilians in these areas, the crime is an option that when they make a decision about their future. I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm just saying what the reality is. So they asked us, so do something on financial education, and we said, I don't think financial education will be enough. We need, to support them professionally. So we designed a pilot that would a kind of a blockchain academy. So we are training these kids to program, also some, an introduction to blockchain, and also financial education and also non-cognitive skills, and building, the competencies of the 21st century. So that would improve the likelihood of they getting a job. It was a very challenging project because it was in Islam, with partnership with the community, the leaders. So they built a safe place for us. The army has occupied the favela. In the previous year, it was one of the most violent places in Rio. But thanks to support of many people that took the risks, and we, the teachers, the partners, we were able to deliver that pilot. And now I'm happy to say that last month, we launched this project national. So we will offer opportunities of programming and financial education for young people across Brazil in partnership with a large public enterprise in Brazil. It's 400 hours of education, 2 years, and it will be totally free. My second project is quite important for me, which is the one on the Amazon region. In 2019, we had our first mission, 1-week mission in the forest after two planes and one 5-hour trip through the river, through the boat to a remote region in the Amazon. And there we were able to contact many tribes in partnership with the local university. And we could saw, we could feel how difficult was, their lives in social and economically dimensions. They were preserving the Amazon, but they were quite poor and living in bad conditions. So in the second mission in February 2020, with a lot of organizations, we've been there and we established a partnership with the National Agency for Indigenous People Protection. And now we have a project that is teaching financial education. They have worked on 9 books on financial education that are now we sent to the Ministry of Education for approval. It's completely the context, the culture, it's everything there. And we will work on financial education and digital literacy. Last week, we got the good news that the first computers of this lab in the Amazon were delivered to the tribe, and we will work with some local authorities to establish the infrastructure, so we'll be able to learn to work together with this tribe, even during the lockdown, to expand the project, include other areas. So I'm very happy about that. I'm very honored to have the opportunity, and I think it's something that we must do. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And actually, let's turn to Europe now. Can you also indicate, Marcel, some of the vulnerable groups there? And I'm going to take also a question from Vietnam that argues, well, and I think it's a point you already have made. Teaching people about investing might be hard. Should people have an advisor or rely on advisors?
Yeah. Now, first of all, I think it is very important when we talk about financial literacy that we go a little more granular and look at different groups, and then we see that there are actually important financial literacy gaps between different groups of the population. In the European Union, on average, low-income groups, women, young people, and older people are among those who have a lower financial literacy than the rest of the population, and score lower when it comes to financial knowledge. And then there are important differences still between the different groups. Young people, for instance, are statistically less financial literate than the middle-aged groups. They are financially less resilient and less aware of the risks involved in borrowing money. At the same time, they are tech savvy, and thanks to technology, they have more access to non-intermediated financial services. For older people, it is the opposite. They also have a lower financial literacy, but also their digital skills are lower, so they face this double challenge. We also have, like the rest of the world in Europe, a gender gap when it comes to financial literacy, and I'm very reluctant to talk about this in your presence, yeah, because you are one of the most eminent experts in the field, and you've produced a lot of very interesting research on this. But the lower financial literacy of women statistically may be one of the contributing factors to one of the reasons why women engage less with capital markets. And that is true for the European Union. And finally, there's also the immigrants and refugee population, where it is crucially important that they acquire the necessary financial knowledge that allows them to integrate into our societies. So financial literacy is an important consideration when it comes to making our societies more inclusive and also more resilient. Now, when it comes to the question of financial advice, yes, access to financial advice is of crucial importance, but it is also important that we create conditions in which, first of all, those who are receiving advice can judge the quality of the advice, and that we create conditions in which the advice is fair and, to the extent possible, also impartial.
Thank you very much. I know we are almost out of time, but I want to still use maybe 1 minute, if I can, to give the opportunity to both Jerry and Nadia to talk about the fact that, how can we potentially better segment the group of the population, as some of the people are asking, and, what is, for example, the role of research and data to do so? And if you can give us just a very brief answer on that. Jerry.
Sure, I'm happy to go first. Data is critical, and being able to collect large data samples is something that enables you to better segment the audience, to run the regressions, to figure out what some of the drivers of lack of financial knowledge or lack of financially capable behavior may be. And so I cannot underscore enough the power of data analytics, and having both qualitative and quantitative research backing up approaches to investor and consumer financial education.
Nadia.
I totally agree with Jerry. Using the data is evidence is really key to regulation and to supervision. Consob has established an observatory on the financial investments of Italian households to monitor individual economic and financial decisions over time. Also in the wake of the undergoing big transformations, which are interesting, involving financial markets. We are also trying to merge survey data related to the observatory I've just mentioned with the supervisory data. complaints data, data on transaction behavior. Just let me mention just a quick example. During the stock market turbulences driven by the outburst of pandemic, we expected panic selling from retail investors' side. In fact, stock purchases prevailed over stock sales, and overall net purchases hit new highs with respect to previous periods. All of this evidence was detected by inspecting supervisory data and by delving deeper also into their distribution by age and gender.
Thank you very much. I know we haven't answered all of your questions, but I wanted to tell you that we are going to send an email also with the link to some of the resources and some of the references of the papers that the speaker today have cited. So you can actually follow up and hope we can provide some information. First of all, I've learned a lot from this impressive group of panelists today. Thank you very much for your insight. And first of all, thank you for the work you do. It's very clear how much the regulator care about the not only the retail investor, but the little person, the little guy who has, perhaps little money to invest, but it doesn't mean that he or she is less important. And I'm very impressed about the work that so many of you are doing. And, I would like to use a message that also the Global Money Week and so on has mentioned, which is we all need to take good care of our money, in particularly in a pandemic, and we should count everybody in. No one is left out. No one, even if you are in the Amazon, even if you live far away, even if you are a disadvantaged group, we all need to participate in the market, and we all need to find important solution to this difficult time. So thank you again for the work you are doing, and I invite all of you to the next webinar. Thank you and bye-bye.